Super Tuesday, the first multi-state contest in the Democratic primary for president. Who will come out on top?
Who can beat Donald Trump? Who can do the job if they get into the White House?
Democrats take a huge risk if we just substitute one arrogant billionaire for another.
Will Bernie Sanders be able to keep his momentum going? Will Michael Bloomberg's late game gamble pay off? Could the Democratic contest be over tonight, or will we see a contested convention? We'll find out starting now.
You hashtag risers out there, welcome back to Hill TV's live coverage of Super Tuesday. Results have started to roll in. We've got lots of results to share with you. Lots of states already called.
All right, voters in 14 states are choosing their candidates. There are more than 1,300 delegates at stake. Before we get into the map, I'm seeing so many of your hashtag riser photos. I love seeing you guys out there watching your phones at home with your families, all of that. Keep them coming. Hashtag risers. We'll retweet some of the best ones.
Let's get it trending, guys.
Let's absolutely
make it happen.
Get it trending. So let's break down, Crystal, I think, a little bit into the numbers. We don't have any new states that we can bring to our hashtag risers.
Had Arkansas been called?
Oh, right. Okay.
We do have a new call out of Arkansas. Not a surprising one, but Joe Biden did win Arkansas, another southern state to him. Sanders is in second right now at 20.6. Bloomberg in third at 20, so that's very close in the second and third, and that's with 21% in.
Right.
That has been called now for Joe Biden. Let's just go through the results that we know so far, because we have a lot of states that have been called. Vermont called very quickly for Bernie Sanders. No surprise there. Virginia, blowout win right at the top of the night for Joe Biden. North Carolina, also a win for Biden. Alabama, also big win for Joe Biden. Maine is too close. It's very tight right now between Bernie and Biden. Bernie has a slight lead, but it's very close. Massachusetts, exact opposite. Biden has a lead, but it is too close to call right now. Oklahoma called for Biden. Tennessee called for Biden. Arkansas called for Biden. Colorado called very quickly for Bernie Sanders. And Minnesota, and this one was a little bit of a stunner, called for Joe Biden. That Amy Klobuchar endorsement paying off.
That is an absolute coup. And just to give everybody an update on the one of the two states that really matters tonight, that is the state of Texas. 10% of precincts that are currently reporting in. There's been a little bit of fuzzy math going on, but I think they've gotten it correctly now, which is that Biden currently has 23% of the vote, Bloomberg at 18.7, Sanders at 29%, Elizabeth Warren at 13.2%.
So Bernie holding on to a lead there for now.
But we still need 90% to turn in. Texas takes a while to count its votes.
And
there's
so
a whole
those early numbers will also disproportionately reflect the early vote, which we expect would benefit Bernie Sanders. So we'll see if he can hold on to that lead. And we have nothing in yet from Utah and nothing in yet.
I think the polls just closed in
California.
Utah literally right now. So we will begin to get some numbers in.
California polls close at 11.
Right.
So it'll be a while before we know anything out of there. So we will see. And that's, of course, the biggest delegate prize of the night.
And where Bernie Sanders put himself, literally all in, basically, in the state. I mean, it's pretty interesting right now, Chris.
Massive organizing there with Latinos, which is a great transition because Hill reporter Rafael Bernal has been following the Latino vote very closely in this entire election.
Right.
Rafael, great to have you. What do you make of, let's just focus in on the Latino vote right now and in Texas, which is something we've been talking to you about. Right. What do we know about how things are shaking out?
Well, the numbers aren't still fully in for Texas. We have, I don't know how many precincts you have reporting. Last I checked, it was about 10 or 15%.
Yeah, we got 10%.
It's trending Sanders. I mean, his Latino vote strategy is definitely, again, paying off. We've talked about this before.
Chuck Richard called it the brown wall.
The brown wall. The brown wall is paying off. The interesting thing is we have the Virginia numbers, and in Virginia, he got a good number with Latinos, while Joe Biden got a good number with African Americans. And I think the headline there, and quite literally, I've seen it all over the place, is voter participation doubled from 2016. Right. You have people actually going out and participating and being excited. I mean, here's a tidbit. Tulsi Gabbard got 10,000 votes in Virginia. Mm-hmm. You know how many Martin O'Malley got in 2016? 3,900.
Wow.
Yeah.
So even the 1% candidates are getting a massive.
By the way, Tulsi won a delegate tonight in American
That's right.
Samoa,
which means
she may be on the next debate stage.
She will be on the delegate. So a friend of the show, Philip Wegman, actually asked a member of the DNC. She's like,
and got it confirmed.
That's
okay.
Right. So
Tulsi Gabbard
there you
coming
go.
to the debate stage
Who
near
can't
you.
wait for that one?
Let me put up, if we can, control room, the exit polls, the NBC News exit poll data that we have here, and the racial breakdown. And this is nationwide. This isn't just in one state. Of the Super Tuesday states, 62% white, 18% Hispanic, beating out the margin, the percentage of black voters in this Super Tuesday states, 14% black, 3% Asian, 3% other. Do you have a sense, Raphael, of is that roughly how you expected it to trend? What do you make of that breakdown?
So it makes sense because of California and Texas, because between California and Texas, they hold over half of the Hispanic population.
I'm sorry to
cut you off. Bernie Sanders is actually speaking right now. If we can go in and take a listen to someone who was saying, let's listen in.
Today, we won the mayoral race in Burlington, Vermont. And we won that race against all of the odds. Everybody said it couldn't be done. And when we began this race for the presidency, everybody said it couldn't be done. But tonight, I tell you with absolute confidence, we are going to win the Democratic nomination. And we are going to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of this country. We are going to win. We are going to defeat Trump because we are putting together an unprecedented grassroots, multi-generational, multiracial movement. It is a movement which speaks to the working families of this country who are sick and tired of working longer hours for low wages and seeing all new income and wealth going to the top 1%. It is a movement which says the United States will have health care for all as a human right. It is a movement that says we will bring major reforms in education, making sure that all of our kids can go to college without coming out in debt. Now, what makes this movement unique is we are taking on the corporate establishment. We are taking on the greed of Wall Street, the greed of the drug companies who charge us the highest prices in the world.
to, of course, Senator Bernie Sanders speaking in Vermont, sounding an optimistic, a positive note, saying they are going to ultimately be victorious because of the way that they take on the corporate interests in the Democratic establishment. Still with us is Rafael Bernal. Let's look forward a little bit here. Well, first I want to update. We've got some Utah results coming in so far. It has not been called. Right now, with 29% of the vote in, Bernie leads there 33%. Actually, Bloomberg, with 29% of the vote in at 18.5. Warren, and then Pete. Okay.
A lot of early voters,
a lot
I
of
guess.
early vote on that one. There you go. But Rafael, let's talk about California. That's the big elephant in the night. That
donkey,
we have.
donkey.
Yeah, donkey, whatever it is, right? Democratic, Socialist. We're going to find out.
The bear.
And the polls close at 11. Of course, we've been talking about it's going to take a long time to get all the votes in, weeks before we really know the final count in California. But just talk a little bit about the Bernie Sanders campaign's investment in that state, their strategy there, and what they've been doing on the ground.
His organizational strategy has, especially with California Latinos who don't get touched by campaigns often, has been to simply go out and talk to them in their language. And sometimes that literally does mean Spanish. Sometimes that means about the issues that they care about. Have an understanding that healthcare is number one for a lot of them, that they're younger Latinos, that a lot of them are the children of immigrants, so they care about how immigrants are treated, and simply treat them the way most voters in this country are treated, with the expectation, and it's been proven to work, with the expectation that will make them turn out and vote.
Yeah. And I mean, just to give you a little bit of data to play with, I'm looking at NBC News exit polls of Latino voters in particular. It validates much of what you're saying. So not only has Bernie been able to increase his threshold by 16 points, 29% support to 45% support, it also shows that Latinos in particular are the one group in Texas where 76% have a favorable position on single government health care plan for all, aka Medicare for all. So it shows certainly that they triangulated on the issue and they set it to the right community in Texas. We just don't have enough of the vote in right now to validate whether that is the case yet or not.
It's to do with a lot of personal experience of people who are working in the campaign. They know that Latino families the wealth gap, they tend to have less accumulated wealth for a diversity of historical reasons. So a medical expense becomes sort of threatening to the completely existential to the economy of a given family. So you have people in the campaign who know that. They go out and they talk to people and they tell them, well, we want to make this change, this change, this change. Sometimes it's single payer healthcare, and they're out voting.
Right.
It's like magic.
And this was the campaign's big bet. I think they knew from the jump that they needed to do better with African Americans in the South, but that was probably not going to be the place where they would have the most natural constituency. And so they placed a big bet on Latino voters, knowing that Texas and California were voting on Super Tuesday, that these would be the two big delegate prizes at stake. And I think it's safe to say, seeing Biden's numbers elsewhere, that if they had not placed that bet, they would be in a very poor position right now. They would not have a shot to win Texas right now if they had not placed that bet on Latino voters. No doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And the interesting thing is, can I be the first to say it? Biden's recreating the Obama coalition. Nobody wants to hear that. But to a certain extent, yes, he's getting
minus the young people.
Right.
They're like sticking their finger in the face of the young people, but that's so it's a little different.
He's talking again with the cultural competency. He's talking to African Americans in the South with that same cultural competency. It is a bit more of a machine vote because of all of the endorsements, but he made his own bet and it seems to have worked out for him.
Yeah.
Now let's see whatever happens over the next few months, that if they can join forces and do those two things at once without losing their Midwestern base, and they got an election right there.
What other states? Let's actually look forward past Super Tuesday. What other states have significant Latino populations where it could really be a deciding factor?
Well, Florida. Florida's going to be very strange. Florida, Also a significant African American population.
Right.
And especially Democrats. I mean, Democrats in registration for 2020, they lead African Americans something like 3.6 million to 60,000 Republicans registered. So African Americans in Florida are huge. There's more Latinos who are registered Democrats than registered Republicans in Florida. You wouldn't think that because the Cuban Republican community is so powerful. It's going to come down to that, and Bloomberg's going to have a shot. He's doing really well in Florida. He sort of speaks a lot to a very capitalist state. And I mean, frankly,
let's be honest. No, you're right. Which is actually, people don't realize, is a large Latino bloc in Florida is actually money coming from.
Can I also say it's easy, and Bloomberg spent $234 million on Super Tuesdays, and has only so far won American Samoa. However, he is outperforming Elizabeth Warren. In many of these states. In Colorado, he's at 23% right now. He's making the delegate threshold in a number of these states, so he will have delegates on the board. It wasn't ultimately, he bet on Biden weakness, right? That was the bet that he placed, that people had seen that Biden was a very weak candidate for reasons that, still remain, that he hasn't made a coherent argument about what he would do as president. He isn't able to articulate himself particularly well, I think is a charitable way to put it. So there was evident weakness there. Bloomberg placed a bet on that. If that coalescing behind Biden had not happened, you could be looking at some very different results right now. Right. Bloomberg could have been in the Biden slot right now under a different scenario.
Easily, and it's Bloomberg bet on advertising to everyone. Biden bet on older white people and African Americans, especially older African Americans. Bernie bet on young white people and young Latinos and even middle-aged Latinos, to be fair. Warren, she kind of didn't bet on anyone. She bet on a what rather than a who. And it seems it didn't. She bet on her plans, which progressives really like her plans. But it's not, they don't really connect to anyone. They're like, oh, that's a good idea.
There was did you guys see this Matt Iglesias piece about Warren and why?
Yes.
Why, if you live in the media bubble, you're like, all my friends like Warren. Why is this not working out? And it's because, white, if you know a lot of people who are white and college educated, chances are good you know a lot of Elizabeth Warren supporters. The problem is those people are massively represented in the media, but not even close to a majority of voters.
That's certainly right. And one thing I want to get with you, this is interesting from Nate Silver, which is talking about how Biden is overperforming with working class whites over Hillary Clinton from 2016. But the only reason it's even competitive is because of Bernie Sanders' increase in the Latino vote. That balance out is actually what's making it a true contest, especially in places like Texas right now and sure to be in California. We should warn everybody, California results are going to take a long, long time to come in. Even in the beginning, we're not going to know all that much. Don't extrapolate out as much as you possibly can from that. It's going to take quite a bit of time. But just your reaction to that in particular.
I think you're right. I mean, Democrats are going out and trying to get voters rather than creating governing coalitions the way the 2016 campaign did. And, the 2016 campaign was basically measuring the drapes in the Oval Office and spent so much time doing that and promising things to political allies, they forgot about the voters.
Raphael, your insights are invaluable.
Thank you, Raphael.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
And now we have a piece from Raphael and also Democratic strategist Christian Ramos. They tell us why Latino voters are such an important part of the electorate this Super Tuesday primary.
Latino voters are the most important group for Super Tuesday just because California and Texas are in Super Tuesday. California moved up its primary from previous years to give it more importance.
You're looking at a day where you're going to be apportioning an incredible amount of delegates. But what's particularly important about Super Tuesday is that you have states like California, Colorado, Texas, Virginia, and North Carolina, which all have large Latino populations in them. If you come in first or second in those states, you have the possibility of winning up to 990 delegates. That's an incredible amount of delegates.
All right, now it is time for a little more context.
That's right, here to pop things off. Great friend of the show, D.C. Bureau Chief of The Intercept, Ryan Grimm. Ryan, a little bit of your reaction to everything, really, last night. And also, just one quick note before we go, which is that Philip Wegman, the reporter I cited, who said that Tulsi will be on the debate stage, apparently got a call from an angry DNC official. It has not yet been decided. So anybody who is surprised by that news, I'm not surprised by that at all.
Surprise.
Not confirmed.
Up there.
My mistake. Blame Phil. You can tweet at him and blame that. Ryan, your reaction.
Wonder what decision the DNC will possibly make on that one. Leave us in such suspense.
I think they're going to bend the rules like
yeah.
But in the opposite direction.
I'll make an exception this time and change the rules.
What are you thinking about what's happening right now?
So I kind of go back to the kind of a point or the theme of the big Bernie Sanders piece that I did in January that I came on the show to talk about.
That's right.
Which was that the Democratic Party, Democratic coalition, as currently constructed, is extraordinarily difficult for a left-wing insurgent candidate to win because of its reliance on suburban, educated voters. And that in order for Sanders to win the nomination, he not only had to beat the other candidates, but he also had to transform the electorate within the party. So he had to either depress the turnout of the other candidates because they were sad that Bernie Sanders is going to surge to the nomination, and that was happening for a little bit. You were seeing low turnout for Biden in some of the early states. Or he had to bring out working class people, young people, who were disaffected from politics and come out to the primaries. He's not doing that to the degree that he needs to do it. He's doing it in some significant way, but it's obviously not far enough. Because you see in states like Virginia, which is Northern Virginia, highly educated voters.
It's a very suburban state.
People who just sincerely believe that government isn't necessarily capable of delivering health care, of combating climate change. They might want it to happen, but they're like, can the government do that? I don't think the government.
Well,
they work for the government. They know. Trust them.
I don't even know if it's so much that as their number one issue is beat Trump.
Right.
That is the annoyance in their daily life. That is the thing that offends them most in their daily life, because these are people who, in the economy as it is, they're doing pretty well, right? They probably they have health care through their government jobs. It's fine for them. So the idea of, we're going to have this healthcare centric message and not also have the electability argument made for them. Look, it's one thing that I think people get wrong in the media routinely is saying, they all hate Bernie Sanders. They want a Bernie Sanders alternative. That's not really it. Bernie Sanders has very high favorability ratings in the Democratic Party, but they want someone to tell them who is the person that can beat Donald Trump. And the Democratic establishment was never going to tell them that that person was Bernie Sanders.
Right, but also the people who live in these suburbs are predisposed to believe that somebody like Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar or even Elizabeth Warren, who's a Harvard professor, are more likely to be electable. They feel like that person could be at their house in their backyard. It's somebody that they understand.
It makes sense to them, yes.
They don't understand Bernie Sanders. Their kids like Bernie Sanders, but beyond that, they don't quite get it.
Ryan, sorry to cut you off there. Joe Biden actually just came out on the stage. Let's drift in there and take a listen to anything that might be intelligible. Let's see.
Just a few days ago, the press and the pundits had declared the campaign dead. And then came South Carolina, and they had something to say about it. And we're told, well, when you got to Super Tuesday, it'd be over. Well, it may be over for the other guy. Tell that to the folks in Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Minnesota, and maybe even Massachusetts. It's too close to call. And we're still waiting for Texas and California, a few other small states to come in. But it's looking good. So I'm here to report we are very much alive. And make no mistake about it, this campaign that will send Donald Trump packing This campaign is taking off. Join us. To those folks, listen, go to joebiden.com. Sign up, volunteer, contribute if you can. We need you, we want you, and there's a place for you in this campaign. People are talking about a revolution. We started a movement. We've increased turnout. And the turnout's turned out for us.
He got the website right, guys.
Congratulations
Nailing it
to Joe
tonight.
Biden. He remembered his website. Largely intelligible, so.
Ryan, I want to look at the flip side of this, okay, because, we hear a lot about, with Bernie Sanders, like, are the suburban voters going to stay home? Are the moderate voters going to stay home? Are people going to turn out for him? I think especially with the very heavy-handed way that the establishment all came in and said, this is the guy, we've anointed him, that's nice young people, that's nice progressives, that you like this guy, too bad, you can't have it. It's a very real concern that hinders Joe Biden's electability, the very thing that he is making his case for. What percent of these young voters who have been inspired to get engaged in politics and get involved in the Sanders movement and send in their money? We know the number of donations across the country. That's a real thing. What percentage of them feels dispirited by this, feels disenfranchised by the Democratic Party, that their viewpoint is just, smeared and dismissed all the time? How much of a factor does that end up being?
No, we're going to find out. I mean, the Democratic establishment is sending a very clear signal to the supporters of Bernie Sanders that they feel like they do not need you, that they can do this on their own.
Yeah.
They've got Beto O'Rourke, they've got Amy Klobuchar, they've got Pete Buttigieg, and Joe Biden showing kind of utter contempt for the general election. Last night came out and said, and I'm going to have Beto O'Rourke do my gun policy.
I saw that. I was like, is this guy, I tweeted this. I was like, this must be a Donald Trump campaign ad. The guy who literally said, I'm going to take your AR-15. Both of you were cringing.
Didn't he say, I'm going to show up at your house?
He's like, yeah, I'm going to come to here. He's like, damn right, we're going to take your AR-15.
So that's how
you're out of your mind if you think that. He's like, I'm going to put this guy in charge of my gun. And it's funny, we almost forgot about some of these moments, Ryan. I remember one during that debate, second or third, whenever he said, he's like, I'm willing to put millions of people out of work in favor of green regulation.
It's Joe Biden. Joe Biden said this.
Cool.
Yeah, that'll be in an ad coming. The Trump people haven't forgotten about that.
Oh, no, I marked it down. And the Trump communications director was on this show the very next day, be like, I think
they have a protester on just
Oh, wow,
on
yeah.
stage with
Apparently
Joe.
somebody went on the stage.
We'll bring that to you if that turns out to be interesting. They've gotten him off the stage and everything's fine. Let's talk about Elizabeth Warren. Okay, centrists all followed the orders. Obama gave him a call or whatever happened behind the scenes. Pete drops out, Amy drops out, Beto endorses, administration officials all line up. It all comes together. And on the progressive side, Elizabeth Warren, even though tonight she's coming in third in her home state, very few states where she will even come in second place, will pick up very few delegates, but she's getting, 10%, 15% in some of these places. Significant part of the vote that if you put that, the portion of those voters who would have gone to Sanders, if you give him those tonight, there are more states. He maybe wins in Minnesota. Maine and Massachusetts is very close right now. He maybe wins them instead of loses them. How much does that matter? And what do you think her thinking is going forward? Is she going to stay in after having gotten third in Massachusetts?
I don't think so. I don't think she can stay in at this point.
Yeah.
But to your point, the Democratic Party establishment, and particularly Joe Biden, spent the last week wooing Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar.
Right.
Working on them, trying to coax them his way. So did other elements of the party establishment. That wasn't the approach that Sanders took.
Yeah.
He did he had a decision to make. He could have tried to do that. Instead, he went to Massachusetts to kind of try to drive a stake in her and kind of push her out of the race. And she pushed back, started calling him, a guy who's raising taxes on the middle class for.
Right.
So you could go back and question all of those decisions. Now, on your question about the center taking orders and the left not taking orders, there weren't clear orders that were going towards Elizabeth Warren. You had Larry Cohen on the Our Revolution side, who wrote a lot of the superdelegate rule or helped write the superdelegate rules, was saying, no, we need her in. Like, it's important that she stay in because Bernie doesn't have a path to 50% without her soaking up 15%.
Right.
Now, if she doesn't get 15%, she should get out, but she should stay in for now. Other elements of the Sanders campaign were saying no, she should get out. So there weren't orders, there wasn't coordination.
Just one quick note. I'm hearing some reports from you guys that our stream was suspended for Super Tuesday coverage. Just asking for policy violations or something like that. I'm asking the control room to look into this, and I just looked at it myself. I think it is back up, but just a note, we're working on it. So everybody, for those of you who are with us, stay tuned. Just go ahead, Chris.
On the delegate question, this is going to have to be something that we parse very closely. So, let's say Minnesota, for instance. Biden winning or Bernie winning doesn't necessarily change a whole lot of delegates if they're very close.
True.
And if Warren has 15% and Bernie has 25%, and Bernie has 25, Warren 15, and then Biden over here with 30. Yeah, he wins, but actually, Bernie and Warren come out with more delegates. That was the Larry Cohen argument,
though. And I know you're just making an argument on behalf of Larry Cohen, which I appreciate. We should get Larry on the show, actually. Yeah. But what you will not convince me of is there was this overwhelming media. I mean, what is Biden getting right now? All these votes are from a media. He had no organization basically in any of these states, no advertising to speak of in any of these. This is all just earned media, free media. So if you have on the one side Biden getting these endorsements and on the other side Bernie getting a Liz Warren endorsement, then at least you have a little bit of a split. Okay, everybody's coalescing. You've got these two sides. You've got a very different media narrative, and you have the reality of, if Warren's out, for sure he wins Massachusetts, where now it's in doubt. For sure he wins Maine. Now it's in doubt. Biden's probably going to get it. Maybe Minnesota. And yeah, maybe the delegates don't change that much. But how much does the media narrative change if he's winning those states instead of losing them? By the way, we have a call we can make, which is a good call for Bernie Sanders. Utah has been called for Bernie, so Elizabeth Warren did not stand in his way there per the conversation we're having. Right now with 33% in, Bernie has 32.2%. Bloomberg actually is in second at 18.7%. Warren in third, 15.5%, and then Biden down at 12%, which is pretty poor performance for him there.
This one we generally expected, right?
For sure.
Younger voters.
It's the youngest. It's the youngest state demographically in the entire country. It's obviously good for Bernie Sanders. Not particularly diverse, although there are some pockets of Latinos. Don't want to erase them, and something they organized as well.
And that's one Larry Cohen would be looking at and saying, "See, I told you." Like Warren right at 16%. Soaking up all of those delegates.
And Biden won't get any delegates in that state. Now it's only 29 delegates in Utah, so not a huge.
But that's the kind of theory of his case.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work when she's down at 10%, because then she's pulling, let's say, 5% away from Bernie, and she's not delivering anything.
Let me ask you something that I've been asking the others, which is what went wrong in between that Nevada smash win and South Carolina? And is there anything that the Sanders campaign could have done in order to reclaim the ground and not be in the situation that they're in tonight?
I mean, if there was a way at that point, to your media narrative point, if there was a way to coax Elizabeth Warren to endorse, like right then, coming out of Nevada, and kind of seal the electability, inevitability, momentum coming into South Carolina, and then if you could possibly stave off Jim Clyburn endorsing, like whatever you could do to stave off Jim Clyburn. That's
that was
don't like Clyburn.
It's a joke, but it's not really.
And maybe if you and I think this is a very good point. If you're able to get Cory Booker to see this as this is the winning team, Cory. Like this is the time to come in, or a Beto maybe could have been up for grabs that week of things are heading in our direction. At that time, they had the win at the back.
You wouldn't get Steyer.
It was the time to make the case for some establishment folks to give them cover so that you can start to see this is the winning team. Everybody out there who's worried about Bernie Sanders, this is the coalition you want to be part of. We're winning states. We're getting these endorsers who, look, individually, like Cory Booker, didn't do very well in the primary, but having those establishment faces behind you, that could have made a difference. And maybe then Clyburn says, I'm just going to stay out and see how this all goes.
If you can pull all that together, then maybe you can.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to pull all that together.
Yeah.
he's the anti-establishment candidate.
Now, here's the other thing that I want to get into is, depending on the margin in California, things could, the delegate count out of tonight could be more or less a wash. Very much depends entirely on that California margin. There's 415 delegates at stake there. The next largest state is Texas, where it's 228. We don't know whether Bernie or Biden is going to win Texas, but delegate-wise, it's going to be very close. You're not going to gain a whole lot of net delegates out of Texas. So they could end up with a wash. So this race is far from over. So going forward from here, I heard James Carville, a crazy person over on MSNBC, calling on Bernie to drop out. He won't be the only one to say that. You're going to get all these calls of let's unify. We got to get behind the guy to go ahead and beat Donald Trump. What do you do if you're the Sanders campaign to pick back up the momentum and make that case that if you want to beat Donald Trump, you need to be with Bernie Sanders, not with Joe Biden?
So the one thing he has going for him is Joe Biden. So Joe Biden didn't really have to do a lot of campaigning from, Clyburn did it for him. He wins South Carolina. He gets the endorsements, the momentum, and you have tonight. So he'll kind of ride this for a day or two because California takes so long to kind of count his votes. But the public is going to be seeing Joe Biden again. And that went terribly for Joe Biden the last time that happened. The Democratic voters had a year to study him and decided they didn't like him. You have something?
That's the key I want to emphasize on here, which is that we went through this. He was the front runner. Pete and Amy and everybody got their turn.
He was in this position, exactly.
Yeah. And then it was a disaster. He couldn't campaign. By the way, when we pulled out away from that bite, we know what ended up happening? He confused his wife for his sister, who was up there on the stage with him. So there you go. We're going to get this all day long, everybody. Yeah. And that's the main thing, Ryan, which is that, but now the Democratic establishment they've cast in. I mean, Obama chief of staff, Susan Rice, Samantha Power, all these people. Clearly the former president has made some sort of signal. And yet they don't seem to care. This seems to be enough for them. Why was that enough? Why was that one win, which we all knew was coming in South Carolina, why is that enough for these people to go all in for Biden at this time?
The hangman's noose. They saw it coming out of Nevada. They saw that this was a very real threat, that Bernie Sanders had a path to winning the nomination. And so at that point, they had to throw absolutely everything against the wall. And that's what they did.
It's ironic that actually the margin in Nevada is what focused their minds.
And also brown working class people. Scared them. Because they can't demonize and
they couldn't say, oh, it's just a bunch of white people. This isn't real. They're just a bunch of college kids like they did in 2016. No. He had this diverse coalition that ran up the score. Nevada, great organization, and it focused the mind to say,
we can't have that.
If we're going to stop this thing, it has to stop right now, or else tonight it would have been over.
So next week is actually fairly lined up for Sanders. Mississippi, probably Biden. There isn't Sanders' campaign isn't very strong down there. It doesn't have a lot going on. But Michigan, was a huge upset for, as everybody remembers, in 2016. And then you have states where he's likely to do well. I think people can look it up. I think it's Idaho, North Dakota.
Isn't Washington coming?
Washington. So he could win. Missouri, which is going to be difficult, but not out of range. I think it was very even between him and Clinton last time. So he could win 4 out of 6, possibly 5 out of 6. Next week. But to your point, the media is going to start subtly trying to push him out of the race. And while he passed on all of the opportunities he had the last month to draw a contrast with Joe Biden over Social Security or anything else, now you saw in his speech that he's doing that. Yeah. And now the media is going to come after him for that.
He's here's
after Biden or Bernie. You're being too mean.
Sorry. In his speech tonight, Bernie started drawing contrast with Biden. One of us supported the Iraq War, one of us didn't. One of us tried to cut Social Security, one of us didn't, and on and on. What you're going to hear from the media is this is just what Bernie Sanders did in 2016. He had already lost the nomination, and he spent months trying to savage Hillary Clinton, and he gave us Donald Trump, and Bernie Sanders is going to give us Donald Trump again. And if Trump gets reelected again, against an establishment candidate, they will again blame the left.
Yes. You are 100%
Ryan
right.
just laid out a
grim future.
A grim future. That's a great segment
for
for Ryan. We need to start making that his daily segment here.
No, let's not do that.
Yeah,
Not like that. Ryan, you're the greatest. You're coming back. What do we have next, Sagar?
All right. So thank you, Ryan. We're going to see you again in a little bit. Coming up, Julia Manchester. She's back. She actually just spoke with Congressman Jim Clyburn. So that's big. She's going to tell us what she learned.
Very big. But first, Rising fans tell us why they voted or why they plan to vote this primary election.
Dan from Sacramento, and I'm going to be voting in the primary on Super Tuesday in California. And I'm voting because I want economic populism to be the center of the 2020 election. Thank you, Rising, for teaching me what that actually meant.
You say we voted for Bernie Sanders. Why? Well, we're Latino. We are working class. What do? Dad works in tile and flooring. I'm a veteran of 2 wars. And, you know, if you do a math equation, that's just the way it adds up.
Hello, Crystal and Sagar. My name's Kimberly. I'm a 40-year-old nurse from the great state of Texas, and I'm early voting for Bernie Sanders for president. And it's really, really important that we vote because our voices should matter and should count. We need to stop endless wars and have Medicare for all. We need to have programs that work for us and save the environment. That's why I'm voting today.
One person who's been on the trail for so much of the action this election cycle is great friend of the show, Hill's political reporter, Julia Manchester.
She just spoke with Congressman Jim Clyburn about Biden's results so far tonight. Julia, it's great to see you. Welcome back.
Good to see you.
Clyburn's got to be feeling pretty good. What did he have to say?
He's feeling very good tonight, and he was really just talking about how, you know, he and Joe Biden really worked to connect with the African-American population in a number of these states, not just South Carolina, but he said after that, he was immediately dispatched to North Carolina. We know in states like Alabama, the black vote is very important there. So he said he made a concerted effort, obviously endorsing Biden, but also worked with Biden to kind of change the way his rhetoric was on the campaign trail, make him seem more direct with, speaking, in general on the campaign trail and in interviews, maybe become more intense, I think, and more combative, I would say.
Clyburn was pretty direct about saying, I'm not going to let this campaign, I'm paraphrasing, but he was fairly critical of the way the campaign had been run up to that point, saying, look, if I'm on board, things are going to change.
Absolutely. And he said these discussions really started around Christmas time. How were they going to really turn things around? But, he was right. I mean, things have really turned around since he really jumped in. They call him a kingmaker, and I think this is very much evidence of that. But we also talked about the primary process and that very important primary calendar. He's for years has been an advocate of making South Carolina one of the earlier primary states, maybe side by side with New Hampshire. And he says, look, it's more demographically representative of the United States, let alone the Democratic Party. And that's why he's pushing for that. And he said after the debacle in Iowa, there's a very high likelihood of that.
So this is interesting, Julia. Does Jim Clyburn understand the role that he has played so far? James Carville, by the way, on MSNBC, literally talking right now. He's like, Clyburn saved the Democratic Party in a kind of single night. And, from his perspective, he's right. Does he understand that?
I think he absolutely understands that. I mean, he very much took credit, for once he jumped in December and started working with the Biden campaign, that he said that's when it started to turn around. And I think he realized how powerful he is in the South. And that's Joe Biden's bread and butter right now, the South. So that's how he's been influential.
Wow. Yeah. And so many states in the South. I mean, this is something we've been tracking for a long time. When we've been looking at the paths for these candidates and, okay, what's their path to victory? We've been looking for a long time at the fact that there were so many southern states stacked up on Super Tuesday that would be a natural strength for Joe Biden. And in fact, he delivered with every single one of them here tonight.
Definitely. Yeah, it'll be interesting, though, going into the next set of contests, Florida, Ohio, Illinois, and Arizona. How will Sanders play in Illinois and Ohio? Those are Rust Belt states. Obviously, he plays very well in the Midwest. There are quite a bit of voters that fall under his umbrella that I think he will work to appeal to there. Arizona, Florida, I think those are probably, at this point, maybe more friendly to Biden. Biden's invested quite a bit in those campaigns, but it'll be interesting to see how aggressive Sanders gets after this and if he'll start to make more visits to those states.
Well, because here's the other counterpoint is if California comes in fairly big for Sanders and he ends the night with basically a delegate draw with Joe Biden after they throw everything at the wall at Joe Biden, and then you have a chance to make the case. You have a chance. Biden has to be on a debate stage, basically one-on-one. What does that dynamic look like? It's not a format that he's particularly excelled in. This race is a long way from over, and there may be a lot more twists and turns to come, especially, like I said, if California comes in big for Sanders. Texas is going to be, I mean, right now Sanders leads. I think it'll come in relatively close, so not a huge delegate gain for either one of them. California, though, could put him in that, even position where then it's just a head-to-head matchup and a slog through.
Absolutely. California, if Sanders wins it, and we assume that he will based on polling and such, if he wins that, I think he will definitely get momentum from that. But you bring up a very good point about the debate stage, because it will essentially be one-on-one, if depending on what happened with Bloom.
I was going to say, were you able to confirm the assessment?
Yeah, we still haven't heard back, but a colleague of mine did, yes.
Here's an interesting thing, Julia. I'm looking here. Jonathan Karl from ABC News reporting that tonight, so far, the only person Barack Obama has called to congratulate, Joe Biden. So it seems to me that Jim Clyburn, very much tied to the Obama machine. I mean, Clyburn went all in for Obama, right? He made Obama back in 2008. And it seems, I'm looking at all these Obama world endorsements, Samantha Power, Dennis McDonough, and Susan Rice, all of this just flowing in on the same day. I think the former president is playing some role in this somewhere. What do you think?
It's very possible. We've heard a lot of speculation. I haven't spoken with anyone close to the former president, so I can't confirm that myself. But I would say Obama world, it's very clear that they are all in for Joe Biden, someone they're very familiar with. And I think a lot of it has to do not only with their connection with him, but they view this as an electability issue. And in their mind, they think Joe Biden is best positioned to beat Donald Trump. And a lot of this also has to do with down ballot races as well. You heard when I spoke with Jim Clyburn, that was a big thing on his mind. He realizes that there are a number of Democrats, including Joe Cunningham in South Carolina, facing very uphill reelection battles. And there's a lot of anxiety among those maybe moderate or more centrist Democrats about how a Bernie Sanders is going to impact their bid. We don't know how it will, but that's their argument.
Is there any reverse concern that the young voters who have lined up so strongly behind Bernie Sanders, because this is the thing that's interesting with Obama, coming in to save Joe Biden in a certain respect, is that Obama owed his political power to young voters. And I was one of those young voters, right, who were so excited. I mean, the rallies, the energy, the small dollar donations, the organizing on the ground. So many young organizers got into the game because Obama inspired them, right? That was his pathway to power. So then to see him now throw in with actively against the young energy in the party, is there any concern that backfires for them and those young voters who they need to turn out, in decent numbers to defeat Trump, stay home?
I think their calculus, and I'm not saying this coming from me, I think the establishment's calculus in all of this is saying, look, Democrats as a whole hate Donald Trump so much that no matter what, they're going to unify to vote against him. That seems to be the calculus. Yes, exactly. So we don't know how it'll play this time, but I think it's a very good point about the young voters. Bernie Sanders has made a concerted effort to visit college campuses more than really any other candidate in terms of the Latino population, new young voters coming in Texas, California. That's going to have a big impact as well as whether, the establishment can really rally them up to come.
I will say it's not just young voters. You know this. I mean, Trump himself estimates, he was caught on that audio thinking he won about 20% of people who would have voted for Bernie because of his position on trade.
There's so many crossovers. Yeah,
there's a lot of crossovers. Let's talk a lot about Elizabeth Warren. So right now, with the states that we have in, she looks viable in Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Utah, and Colorado. So she drew significant percentages in each one of those. She got over 15% of the vote in each one of these. Any indication tonight from her team that she's rethinking things? It looks like, has not been called yet, she's going to get third in her own home state. That's a pretty devastating result.
You know, her team said a couple of days ago she's going to stay in it until the conventions. Campaigns say a lot of things.
Yeah,
and
they
those
say
things
a lot.
Yeah, but we're not hearing too much of an indication of any change. I think, you know, she got a huge endorsement from Emily's List yesterday, a pro-choice Democratic group that works.
I missed that. That's
she got a big endorsement from them. So I think they're, you know, she's, and I don't say this knocking her, but she is very much playing on this fact that she's the only, you know, besides Tulsi Gabbard, but Tulsi Gabbard hasn't performed as well in these states as she has. She is the only viable woman in the race right now. And when you have Mike Bloomberg, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, all 70-something-year-old white men. So she's pushing that right now. But one thing I'm interested in is how she's going to impact this race. Is she going to split that progressive vote, which for a while the moderate vote was very much being split, or is she, you know, maybe helping helping Bernie in a way by peeling off votes from Joe Biden? You know, I think a lot of these voters, and and I'm guilty of it as well. Sometimes we create these lanes, the progressive lane, the moderate lane. But you talk to a number of voters about their second choice. I've talked to Buttigieg voters who said I would absolutely vote for Sanders or Warren and vice versa.
Although that's not what we saw. I mean, what we've seen tonight is that when Pete endorsed Biden, his voters were like, And same thing with Amy. I mean, Biden just won Minnesota. That was a big upset in the state. Clearly, Amy's voters went, all right. She said to go to that guy, and that's what we're doing. I do think that had a lot of power for him. And also, there's also the media narrative question of if you have, you know, okay, on the one hand, the moderates consolidating here, and on the other hand, the progressives consolidating here, then you have a little bit more of a balanced media narrative rather than just, oh, everybody's going in for Joe Biden, right?
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see what happens with Warren's campaign, especially in Massachusetts. I've been looking, I mean, she's projected to be third. I think last time I saw some indication that Biden was leading in the state. I haven't looked at the latest polls.
I can update that right now. We've got 59% of the vote in, and Biden leads. Actually,
we just got a call from the state of Massachusetts.
Wow. Biden has won Massachusetts. 59% in, he's at 34%, Sanders at 27%, Elizabeth Warren 20%. And you talk about, look, splitting the progressive vote. Is there any doubt in your mind that if Warren gets out and endorses Bernie, that Bernie doesn't win Massachusetts?
Exactly. Exactly.
No doubt.
This is New England voters. We've seen they like to vote for their fellow New Englanders. So this is amazing right now. And the fact that Bernie Sanders, someone who is well known in Massachusetts, very popular in Massachusetts,
leading the polls there. He did that massive rally there on Saturday.
Right.
And look at that number today. 34%. That's a huge 34-2. Sanders 27. It's not even close.
And just to talk about the political environment in Massachusetts right now, you have a very contentious progressive primary, the Democratic primary.
I forgot about that. I should be looking at that.
Joe Kennedy, both very progressive, facing off. That kind of gives you an idea of how, you know, progressive the state is, and the fact that Biden was able to win that. Wow.
Can I just throw one more factor into this, which I don't know how real this is, but I do want to put it out there. A lot of people, a lot of news coverage about coronavirus right now, a lot of very real concern.
Oh, I love this.
Especially, I think, particularly among Democratic voters around coronavirus. According to the NBC News exit poll, among Democrats who said coronavirus was an important factor in their vote, Biden won 47%, Sanders 29%, Bloomberg 10%, Warren 9%. So the coronavirus vote went strongly forE Biden.
Absolutely.
Which, you know,
it tends to make sense.
They've seen him in leadership. They know they can picture him there, all those things. And so it looks like the coronavirus vote also lined up behind Biden.
And you saw Bloomberg trying to capitalize on that over the past couple of days, trying to talk about it in his advertising and his speeches. Doesn't appear like it's really paid off for him. But I think that's a great point, that when there's a crisis, maybe Americans like to see a familiar face, someone they have seen in leadership during a time of crisis. So I think that's a very good point. Absolutely.
Very interesting. Julia, thank you. Thanks, with
Julia.
us.
Thank you.
We're going to have more results from states across the country and our Super Tuesday panel. But first, let us wait. Do we have these things? These why we're voting? That's what we're doing now?
That's right.
More rising fans. Tell us why they're voting. Let's take a look.
Hey, up the hill. This is Nate Evans, And I intend to vote here in El Paso, Texas for the great Major Tulsi Gabbard. And right here is the reason why. That's it. That's why I vote. My kids.
Hi, my name's Claire. I'm a 20-year-old college student from Ohio, and I'm voting for Bernie because I have been following his campaign since 2015, since before I could vote, and this is the first time in my life I'm going to be able to vote for him, and I just got my ballot in the mail, and I'm going to be filling that out right after this, so thank you.
My name is Vanna Mae, and I voted early in the state of California for Bernie Sanders. The reason I voted for Bernie Sanders is because I believe that healthcare is a human right and not a privilege. It's sad to see so many people in our communities have to go into an enormous amount of debt in order to better themselves. We can do better than that in this country.
All right, guys, let's just go back over the results we have tonight. Pretty stunning night, one that Joe Biden and the establishment have to feel very good about, although we still have California and Texas out there. Vermont called for Bernie Sanders, no surprise there. Virginia, big win for Joe Biden. North Carolina for Biden. Alabama for Biden. In Maine, it is still very close, essentially tied right now with 56% of the vote in, so we will keep an eye on that. Massachusetts, stunner just called recently for Joe Biden.
Right.
Elizabeth Warren coming in third in her own home state. Oklahoma Biden, Tennessee Biden, Arkansas Biden, Colorado went strongly for Bernie Sanders. Minnesota, another stunner, that Amy Klobuchar endorsement coming through for Joe Biden in the state. Texas still outstanding. Sanders has a lead, but it is getting cut down bit by bit as the day of vote comes in. So I think that one's going to be very tight. Probably no real delegate advantage for either person. Utah goes for Bernie Sanders, and the big kahuna, California. Polls close here in just a few minutes, so we'll start to get in some results there. But a reminder, those results will be slow to come over the days and weeks to come.
4 minutes to go until those polls close in California. Part of the issue here is that Sanders is going to have to deal with the fact that you just read off a lot of states with the word Biden up there at the top. However, what does all the delegate math actually come down to? Texas and California. As you said, those are the big kahunas. Who qualifies that 15% threshold and not?
Right.
That, honestly, in a couple of days, we'll have a better idea of what happened tonight than we do right now. But the issue for Sanders is the amount. I mean, look, 2 days, 48 hours of earned media is all it took from Joe Biden to go from dead to completely, like, the winner, essentially, tonight in the eyes of the media. You're going to hear it over and over again. I thought that Ryan Grimm laid it out perfectly, which is that what you're going to happen is you're already seeing James Carville's on MSNBC tonight saying Bernie Sanders needs to drop out of the race. And it's, what you're also going to begin seeing is whenever he tries to attack the now redeemed frontrunner, I guess frontrunner lost, now frontrunner status again, they're going to say, why is he doing this? He's being divisive. Biden wants to unify the party. So he's in a very, very tough position whenever it comes to the media narrative, regardless of whether he's going to be okay in the delegate math tonight.
Yeah. And on the other hand, Biden is Joe Biden.
He is. He misidentified his wife and his sister tonight.
Far from a flawless player on the field.
So, you know.
So this race could have many more twists and turns to come, no doubt about it. We can throw up Maine, which is remarkably close here right now with 56% in. Biden and Sanders, you know, just a few hundred votes there. What is it, 500 votes separating Biden from Sanders right now. That one extraordinarily close. No idea which way it's ultimately going to go. But this was supposed to be a Bernie state. It shouldn't have even been in doubt. So that is the kind of night that Bernie Sanders has been having so far. All right, can we bring in the panel now, guys?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Now joining us on our fantastic Team Rising panel, we have Democratic strategist Andrew Feldman. Hill political reporter Julia Manchester is back. We've also got senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum, Inez Stepman, and Democratic strategist Don Calloway.
That's
Welcome
right.
to
All-star
the table,
super
guys.
panel.
Great to see all of you.
Good to see you guys. All right, so Don, let's start with you. What do you think is the big takeaway from tonight? And especially one thing you can touch on. You gave us excellent South Carolina analysis. How is it that Jim Clyburn had such a massive impact? Not only there in that state, he rescued Joe Biden's career.
Yeah, he did. Well, like
if
I said,
he becomes president, it's because of Jim Clyburn.
Well, he's got to appoint Jim Clyburn secretary of whatever Jim Clyburn wants to be.
That's right.
Well, like I said, Jim Clyburn, unlike a lot of other politicians, is a legitimate civil rights leader who brought folks, had a hand in bringing people out of the Jim Crow era. So he has had a direct impact on South Carolinian lives, and that translates throughout the South. What happened tonight, I think Democrats need to ask themselves some existential questions. It's not the question that I thought we were going to come in here asking a week ago. A week ago, I thought we would be saying, how are we going to look at Bernie folks and take this convention from them? That's what I thought Democrats were going to have to answer, but that's not. Today, I think the question is reversed. Will Team Bernie woman up, man up, and be the adults in the room and vote for the Democratic nominee or not? If Joe Biden wins this thing fair and square, right? As of this moment, it is a two-person race. And Team Bernie is going to have to decide, are they in it to beat Trump? Are they going to play on the Democratic team? Or are they going to burn the house down if, in fact, Joe Biden wins it fair and square before it gets to superdelegates?
But to push back on that, Don, I don't think it's just on, Team Bernie, and I assume by that you mean all of his supporters
all of his
who
supporters,
invested a lot in his campaign and who are in it not because necessarily of Trump, but because of the principles and values, because of Medicare for All, because of Green New Deal, et cetera. Is it just on them when the establishment has, in a very heavy-handed way, said, great that you young people are into this stuff.
That's right.
We don't care.
At the end of the day,
this is our guy, and we're coming in for him. Don't they also have a responsibility?
Absolutely. It is on the nominee to unify the party. That and that would be the case if it's Bernie too, right? It's on Bernie to invite other folks into the fold. It's on Joe Biden, presumptively, to invite other people into the fold. But at the end of the day, folks are going to have to decide what's most important here. Perhaps Bernie Sanders' legacy, and I'm not counting him out of this by any means, but it was a good night for Joe Biden. Let's acknowledge that. Perhaps Bernie Sanders' legacy is not to be the Messiah, but to be a messenger. Say, I'm not going to be the guy, I'm not going to be president, but my legacy is that I have moved this party demonstrably left. I have left my imprint on this party forever. I have changed American politics forever. And if he is not the nominee, then folks are going to have to decide whether or not we want to see him.
Here's the counter to that as well, though, Inez, which is that very possible that after California results come in, the delegate count is basically tied. Meaning that the Democratic establishment threw everything they could at Bernie Sanders, and they still were not able to actually win it from him or take it from him. And then you're basically back to square one, or whatever square, head to head, Bernie versus Biden, and let's have that debate. Isn't it in some ways a sign of weakness for them? The best that they can do is tie the guy who they say is terrible and has no constituency, nobody likes him, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I'd say two things. One, of course, if it is a head-to-head matchup, Biden goes in with the advantage not only of the establishment behind him, but because the establishment is behind him, Biden doesn't necessarily have to come in first. If they're close, the convention very well may take it from Bernie. That will not happen to Biden, right? If Biden is in the lead going into the convention, Biden will be the nominee, right? So he has that advantage. But I do think the big divide between these two comes down to whether people think that Donald Trump was a symptom or he is the problem and the deep problem with America, right? Joe Biden is a candidate who's basically saying, if we can dial the clock back to 2015, America will be happy again. And I think that's why you see, this huge breakdown in the party. It's whether or not you think the fundamentals of politics on the right and the left are shifting since the end of the Cold War or not. But Biden is throwing it back to 2015. I'm not sure that's the best general election message, to be honest.
1 second, and as big call I can make just now, just over the wire from the Associated Press. Polls have closed in California. They have called it immediately. Sanders wins the Democratic presidential primary in California. So, Andrew,
the fact that it's an immediate
the fact that they call it immediately, that means the margin is very big there.
It also, by the way, means that he gets the media narrative about California.
That's right. He does get it now.
People are still watching TV.
People who are still awake.
Which matters. It does.
What do you think, Andrew?
Well, up until now, it was a great night for Joe Biden. I was about to get ready and say that I'm not sure that the margin is going to be as large as we thought it would be in California in the beginning of the night. But I'm glad you broke the Associated Press news. That is good news for Bernie Sanders. Absolutely means that there's a wide margin. We'll see what it is, right?
Yeah.
But absolutely a huge night for Joe Biden. Really a huge night, because what I was saying this morning on the program is we're not sure if black voters were going to stay with Joe Biden.
Right.
Was that something different we saw in South Carolina? No. Black voters love Joe Biden. They made that very clear tonight, and that is a huge advantage he has moving forward.
Especially in the South. And the numbers outside of the South were more divided. I'll be interested to see the numbers in California. There is a lot of regional variation, but no doubt in the South, black voters came out very strongly for Joe Biden. I wanted to ask you, Andrew, because you've been Warren friendly, Warren curious, Warren supportive, whatever you want to call it. You've had admiration for her, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
What do you make of, first of all, what do you make of her having decided to stay into this moment and having to suffer a third place finish in her state at this point, coming in behind both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders? 20% of the vote in her home state is where it stands at 66%. At the same time, if she's out, there's probably a few more states that Bernie Sanders picks up tonight. Maybe he pulls off Minnesota. Maybe he certainly pulls off Massachusetts. There may be a couple others on the board that go a different direction if she consolidates behind Bernie the way the moderates consolidate behind Joe.
It's interesting, though, when you talk about Elizabeth Warren consolidating with Bernie. The problem with that is we haven't seen the people who vote for Elizabeth Warren being a straight shot voting for Bernie Sanders. So I'm not sure that would have happened.
Probably 60-40.
We hadn't seen that the other way with Pete and Amy, but when they endorsed Biden, their voters came.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's interesting to see, though. Remember, we had a lot of early vote happen that still seemed to, help Joe Biden as well. I'd be interested to see the early vote breakdown. But back to Elizabeth Warren. I think that she had every right to stay into Super Tuesday. Why? Because she was able to build teams throughout the Super Tuesday electorate. She did not just say we're going to just vote in Tennessee and not have a team there. She had teams all across the 14 states. So good for her. Let her be able to vote. But now I think tomorrow morning is a different conversation. Her campaign put out a memo, as Julia has talked about a couple days ago, saying that they were going to come in second in 8 states and 14 in at least second or third. Mm-hmm. That did not happen tonight. No. So I think you have to look at again.
Bloomberg Julia, in a number of places.
Yeah, can you pick up on that there, which is that the promise of the memo really didn't materialize from Super Tuesday. So it's very possible that we see Elizabeth Warren come out tomorrow morning with maybe some announcement that she's coming out. She did, however, I want to put this out there, she bought, I think, she bought some media buys all the way up until March 9th.
That was all, I think,
it could be a head fake. Let's see. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very possible that she comes out tomorrow morning. I think she's getting a lot of pressure from that Sanders wing of the party, a lot of progressives, essentially calling her a spoiler in all of this. So she's going to get quite a bit of pressure there. However, I think moving forward, Sanders, like you said, Crystal, he needs her at this point, and I think them together, if she had dropped out earlier, she would have, helped him win Massachusetts, essentially.
I think you're right. Yeah. And Naz, can you pick up on one thing here, which is that I've been trying to think about this as the 2016 lens with Trump, and it seems that the Democratic establishment is much more powerful than the Republican establishment was in their ability, or maybe this just talks about how people hated Ted Cruz so much that they just couldn't stomach getting behind him in order to back and eventually stop Trump. Where is it that analogy falls apart? Because the Democratic establishment has done what the Republican establishment could not do. They stopped the anti-establishment frontrunner in his tracks, essentially, on Super Tuesday, and they've now made this a knockout, bloody, total war going into the convention.
So I've been thinking about the same question, right? And this has been the big question for me. I think the answer I've landed on is that Joe Biden is actually the establishment guy. Like, this would be as if Jeb Bush was still running and still had life if he had won a primary. Mm-hmm. It without the major establishment figure, because let's not forget, the lines have been redrawn, but in 2015, 2016, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, they're both Tea Party candidates. Right. Neither one of them is considered truly establishment. Rubio is a little more establishment friendly than Cruz, right? But you still don't have that straight up race between the establishment favorite that everybody thought in D.C. was the front runner and the insurgent anti-establishment candidate. Jeb Bush got like 3% of the vote.
Right.
The Republican establishment has absolutely no constituency in its base, and that became very clear in 2016.
And also,
that's not the case with the Democratic Party,
and also,
apparently.
Don, they also didn't have a Barack Obama. And they didn't have, and Joe Biden, look, we cover his, the faults here and the policy problems in the past and all that stuff, but he's liked. People really like him. He's broadly liked. He had a base that was solidly with him from the jump. And so it isn't exactly an analogous situation.
Let's be clear about this. I think all of us in our own respects, I've listened to all of you all a lot, all of us are somewhat anti-authoritarian and rebellious, right? And we all bring that, which is why we're here on Hill TV, and I think we all bring that.
But let's be clear. Tweet with hashtag risers.
That's right, hashtag risers.
Hashtag risers.
But let's be clear here. There are lots of really good reasons to vote for Joe Biden. He is entirely competent, and he has a very deep humanity. Well,
I'd say competent.
He has a
humanity.
He has a very deep humanity that resonates with people. But listen, what I want to say. This is what I want to say. We're not going to put this on the Democratic establishment having chosen Joe Biden. In the words of Andre Benjamin, my Lord and Savior, Andre Benjamin, 1995, The Source Awards, the South got something to say. Black folks had something to say. When black people spoke in South Carolina, that's what changed this. And we're not going to sit here and equate the black vote in America, which is the heart and soul of the Democratic Party, to the establishment having spoken.
No,
that's not what happened here.
That's not what we're talking about.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Black people had their say. Black people had their say through the Deep South today, and that's why Joe Biden is on top, because he is the choice of black voters.
There's no question. I'm actually not equating the vote. What I'm more talking about is Dennis McDonough, Susan Rice, Samantha Power.
I understand that, but let's be clear. Pete and Amy didn't turn the tide for Joe Biden. Black people in the South
you don't think he won Minnesota
Massachusetts was great, but that's not why Joe Biden's winning. Joe Biden's winning because of South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas tonight, and that's because black folks had their say.
I'm not sure
Let's be clear, they had not had their say in the first month and a half of voting.
But I'm not sure if that's right in a state like Virginia when you win 53% of the vote.
Virginia is substantially black.
Of course it is, but I'm not saying you don't win 53 to 23 just because of the black vote.
But look at the other states that have been called for Biden.
And also we should point out, you were 100% correct at the South. The rest of the country, the black vote was not as consolidated as in the South. There was a solid constituency in the South. There's no doubt
Bernie
about
has
that.
a legit claim to African American support. He does, and that was shown today in Colorado, in California, especially, right? Yeah.
And there is also, a deep generational divide, which is maybe the most significant dividing line between these two candidates. And young people did not show up the way that the older black voters who solidly back Joe Biden did. Andrew, let me ask you a campaign question.
All right.
Because Joe Biden basically didn't have a campaign in many of these states. He had not, until he went to Texas with the Beto and Amy and Pete party, he did not go to any Super Tuesday state for a month. They had next to zero advertising. The New York Times went to California, which he did lose, and saw that his office was padlocked shut.
Right.
This was not a campaign that had the money or the organization on the ground that came even close to what the Sanders team had, both through paid staff and through volunteers. I mean, the volunteer operation is second to none with the Sanders people, and the door knocking and the phone calling and all of that. And also, we should say, Elizabeth Warren, very big, aggressive ground game. We heard a lot early on about how she had the best team on the ground, most staff out there, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, it couldn't really compete with just the earned media influx.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that?
Look, I spend my day getting earned media, so I love to see that. But
That's your job.
But also,
It's a different landscape, though. It's a different media landscape.
It absolutely is. But I do want to point out that if I'm the Bernie campaign, I am going to do some deep soul searching of what happened to my organization. Mm-hmm. You had teams across all these states, and they did not show up for you. I really believe that. But also, Joe Biden.
I'm push back on that a little bit, because I think if Chuck Rocha and the Sanders team do not organize the Latino vote in Texas.
You are absolutely right, but Chuck Rocha is not in Virginia. Chuck Rocha is not in those offices every single day.
Yeah.
You have to credit Chuck Rocha what he's done with the Latino vote. Absolutely. That's different from what's going on in Minnesota, what's going on.
Yeah.
But
is it a failure of organizing, or is it just about how powerful earned media is? Because think about this. Joe Biden had one office in Virginia, and he won the state by 50
because
points.
Joe Biden, people know. I think it also, but it goes back. Look, power of earned media, absolutely, but also it goes back to what we said about Joe Biden earlier. People like Joe Biden. They know Joe Biden, and based on the exit polls tonight, they fundamentally believe he can beat Trump, and that is the number one piece of this. That I don't think Bernie's campaign has articulately enough argued why they can beat Donald Trump compared to Joe Biden.
I think that's right. Julia, let's fast forward from here, right? Okay. Bernie's won California. The delegate count is going to probably come out pretty close now tonight. Right. And then you sort of reset and everybody gathers themselves and, dust settles and you look around at where things are. What do you think the Sanders campaign is thinking right now about the case that they need to make now and what they do to move forward?
Well, there are a number of other critical states that will vote about 2 weeks from now: Florida, Arizona, Illinois, and Ohio. In Florida, we know that Mike Bloomberg has invested quite a bit in the state. That being said, he did not have a good showing tonight.
Not
obviously,
at all.
So they are going to reassess. They are going to reassess that.
He did better than Warren.
And I think the way, being a native Floridian myself, the way Florida has voted in the past, I would say Biden obviously has the best chance. I think when Sanders was also asked about the Fidel Castro by Anderson Cooper, his answer did not sit well with a lot of Latinos and Hispanics in South Florida, so that could play very much against him. Arizona, we haven't really talked that much about the down ballot implications of a lot of these endorsements. There's a very important Senate race happening in Arizona. Mark Kelly will likely face off against Martha McSally. Democrats are holding their debate there in a couple of weeks, so that's going to be a huge race.
And Mark Kelly endorsed Joe Biden.
Yes.
That's right.
So that will be very, I would think that would be easy for Joe Biden, or at least he will have a good showing there. But when you move up to Illinois and Ohio, especially Ohio, it's going to be a different story. Ohio is part of the Rust Belt. We know that Bernie's messages plays very well in parts of the Rust Belt, so he will be competing, I would say, better there. However,
Michigan as well.
Michigan as well. However, Joe Biden also has a claim to the Rust Belt as well, being from Scranton.
And he overperformed. I want to say, Inez, this is one interesting thing. He overperformed with non-college educated white folks for the first time, Joe Biden tonight in the state of Virginia. I'm not sure if that's extrapolated all across the case, but that was the exact demographic that Sanders did quite well in 2016, and that's the exact Trump demographic.
So I've been wondering about the same thing, and I'm not a campaign number cruncher, as I've said many times on this show, that I am not a consultant or a strategist. But the big thing that surprised me on the map this time was Joe Biden taking Minnesota.
We were surprised by that,
and it makes me wonder if the voters that flipped from Bernie in 2016 did not vote for Hillary Clinton, flipped for Trump. If those voters are lost to the Democratic Party for good, because if they're not voting in the primary, it would expand. Now, I don't have the numbers to back that up.
No, I think you're probably right.
I think that there's a possibility that that's what's happening. The voters that Bernie Sanders probably was counting on, a certain percentage of them, they have flipped and become Republicans, and they are Trump-supporting Republicans.
Don, what do you think if you are, all right, so we played if you're Bernie. Actually, I want to hear from you on what you think the Sanders campaign should do from here to try to regain the momentum, get the juice back, and have a shot to win a plurality.
Double down on the media buys, double down on places where you're advertising and talking to people who have checked out of the process, particularly young people.
But it hasn't worked, Don.
It hasn't worked, but again, just stay at it because he's not losing, right? He had a rough night tonight.
It's basically tight.
He had a rough night tonight, but by no means is Bernie Sanders out of this thing. I think, actually, I really enjoyed the Dick Van Dyke ad where he's making the case to seniors about why seniors need to be looking at him and not dismissing him. I thought that was a really substantial. It made an impact on me, and I'm a cynic in this game. So, but I don't think that this is exactly panic mode. If I could disagree with you, Andrew, for Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders.
Well, I'm not saying it's panic
Bernie
mode.
Sanders has every bit as much of a claim to the pole position right now as Joe Biden does. So I think that Bernie just needs to retool, get a couple of days of rest, and be ready for the long-term boxing match.
He won't get the same claim to the media narrative, right? So that's where this will really. I mean, it's the same thing. If you look at if the narrative coming out from the media was Bernie wins the first 3 primaries, right? We had the Iowa mess that muddled the message there. Bernie can't count on any of that. That's the problem of running as an outsider, is you can't count on any of those things to sort of give you a lift when you have a bad day or whatever.
Right.
And
no
so
one's going to help you out.
Biden is for sure going to have, just like at the convention, he's going to have all of the supports lined up that he needs to. Bernie won't. So a tie between them. It's going to be.
It goes media. Go ahead.
So I think the question for Bernie Nation is, you're right. If he won't have the media narrative, he won't have what we're calling the establishment behind him going forward, right? He won't
I can't
get
believe
the.
you just called black voters the establishment.
He won't get.
Get out of here.
He won't get the elected endorsements, right, going forward.
Yes.
So I think that Bernie folks need to think about whether or not he has hit his plateau, whether or not this is as good as he can capably perform. Obviously, he's a great candidate. He's a phenomenal talent, and what he's done has changed the game forever. But they really realistically need to think about if they have performed as well as they mathematically possibly can.
Right.
Because the one thing about Bernie, as amazing as his movement has been over the last 5 years, they have not been able to expand that movement beyond their basic core
And I want
of
to jump
support.
in here because my last thought on this is, he has said since the beginning of this campaign that he had a coalition. He was expanding this base.
Yes.
We did not see that tonight. We did not see it in South Carolina. We'll look at black voters. And final point is, look at what happened to white voters in Minnesota, to Maine. They feel much better about Joe Biden than they did about Hillary Clinton.
Last thought, Julia. Right
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Andrew. I think it's questionable whether Bernie Sanders can even expand his coalition at this point. We'll have to watch Michigan, some of the returns from California, but
he
we'll
did
see.
expand his coalition with Latinos, though.
Absolutely.
That's
Yes,
been a real.
So one area-
We would all agree.
It's the reason why he's in the game.
Definitely.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
All right, super panel.
Thank you.
Thank
you guys
you.
are amazing. Appreciate you.
You guys are the best.
Let's take a look at those California results that we are starting to get in. This is very early. Less than 1%. Pete at 10%.
And you will be waiting for a long time on this
to get these
just
in.
to put it even more.
But you've actually, with this is probably some of the early vote, honestly, that we're seeing right now. Just a few thousand votes in at this point. Bernie leading Bloomberg at 21%, Biden in third, and Pete at 10%, which again is an indication that is probably a good chunk of the early vote that you're seeing there. Those results are going to come over not just tonight, but the coming days as well. We will get a sense of just how sizable the Bernie Sanders margin is. He's still up in Texas as well. That state could end up pulling through for him. And I think if that happens, then he has a claim on a decent media narrative of basically, okay, tonight was a wash. And then we can move forward from there.
So you can see there. By the way, I am hearing things about a total mess down in Texas where people are still in line after 3 hours. They haven't voted. The initial numbers, as we know, Crystal, were wrong when they came in. Now they seem to be correct. Anyway, with that being said, on Texas, my beautiful home state, 35% of the vote reporting, 28.6% Sanders, 26.7% Biden. It's still close, and you know what? There's just not enough that we can extrapolate with only
Sanders leads by 22,000 votes right now, but what we are seeing is that as day of votes come in slowly, that Biden is slowly but surely ticking up and Bernie is slowly but surely ticking down. However, look, we don't know where these votes are coming in from exactly. Are there college towns out? We don't know any of that. And the other thing I would say here is from delegate perspective, it's probably going to be a fairly close race, meaning that nobody's going to gain a massive amount in terms of the delegate count. We ready to go with these guys?
Are we ready to go? Control room?
Two all-stars back at the table.
Oh man, we have the two great. I don't know how many times I can say that. Friends of the show, the amazing panelists, Kyle Kondik from the Crystal Ball, and of course we can make the Crystal Ball joke. And Ryan Grimm, he's here again. Two great friends. All right, guys. So Kyle, you've taken a little bit of time. You've digested some more numbers for us. What do you have to report back?
I was sort of judging tonight as to whether Sanders would win any states in the South, which is Biden's strong point, and whether Biden would win any states in the North. Biden has won states in the North. He won Massachusetts and Minnesota. Those results are pretty shocking to me.
They are shocking.
And he might even win Maine. Maine is real close right now. Again, we're not talking about huge delegate totals or something, but I think there's some value to Biden to be proving something in the Northeast and the Midwest because that's where the map is going to turn here to big states like Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois. I think think it's probably a foregone conclusion that unless this race changes again, which of course it could, Biden's probably going to do really well in Florida and Georgia, which are coming up later in March. I will say one good thing for Sanders, though. California was called immediately at 11 Eastern. Right. I was kind of surprised by that, given that the night's generally been better for Biden. And I thought maybe that I figured Sanders would win California, but that it wouldn't be called immediately. So that's a great development for Sanders.
Media-wise,
have you seen exit polls about what they expect the margin to be there ultimately? Because we have barely any results in it.
The exit polls were indicating a Sanders lead about 15 points. It was like 38 to 23 for Biden. And I think it was that. I think Warren was close to the 15% statewide threshold,
So
and Bloomberg was below.
That's the
but again,
question.
Remember, we've talked about this. Results are going to take a while to come in.
Yeah, we only have 6% of them.
But, you know, Henry Olsen, who's a Republican election analyst who I really respect, he was looking at the initial numbers for the exit polls, and he was like, well, hey, Sanders could get 85 to 100 more delegates just in California than Biden does, which could make up for some of the losses that Sanders has suffered elsewhere.
Especially depending on where Texas comes in right now.
Correct, yes.
So, Ryan, I mean, overall, you've taken some time to digest. What are you seeing? By the way, any update on those AOC races that you were telling us about this morning? Do we know about Jessica Cisneros and Henry Cuellar, or is it still too close?
Cisneros is very close. She's trailing Cuellar slightly. This is the race where the DCCC, Nancy Pelosi, and the Kochs teamed up to try to beat Emily's List and AOC back Jessica Cisneros. Mike Siegel, progressive populist running in Texas 10, is crushing the corporate attorney in his race. She appears like she won't make the runoff even. He's flirting with 50%, probably won't get it, so he'll make it through the runoff. So that's one victory.
That is a big deal.
Wow.
From progressives in Texas.
Yeah.
Well, and you have to wonder, too, if some of those numbers are helping to bolster Sanders in the state, keeping him in play there.
Yes, but the election day numbers coming in on Texas are just wild. Like a swing unlike anything I've seen.
Wow.
So, Biden and Sanders tied, Sanders up a little bit in the early vote, and it's looking like Biden up by 20.
Wow.
15 to 20 in the day of. So as the day of keeps coming in, it's possible that Biden could come away winning Texas.
Kyle, can you have you ever seen a swing like that?
The only thing I could think of is that in the 2012 Republican race, basically what would happen to either Newt Gingrich or Rick Santorum is that they would jump to a lead, and then the Romney super PAC would come in like the Death Star and just destroy them. And I remember that specifically in Florida, and the numbers would just go crazy. And also Gingrich in South Carolina, when he won it, that was also kind of a late-breaking thing. Remember, there was that debate, and he
took it to the media.
And the first question was about one of his affairs or whatever, and he said, let me tell you something. So,
that was a great.
I've covered it here. I think that was a big moment. It was a big moment.
And so there are examples of big swings, but boy, in this short time frame. This is just incredible. And again, to me, it really stands out in these handful of small northern states. And you talk about Warren maybe cutting into Sanders a little bit. Personally, I think if Warren were to drop out of the race, I think Sanders probably benefit more than Biden, but I think it might be kind of mixed.
Yeah.
But you especially look at some of the college towns where I think maybe the students are voting for Sanders, but kind of the
professors,
the soccer moms are voting for, or the professors or whatever voting for Warren.
Yeah.
I think at some of those places you could see Warren, and I think in Massachusetts and like the Boston area you saw that. Now, is that enough to flip the state? I don't know. But Bloomberg is potentially thinking about getting out too. So
we saw some early reporting on that. That's pretty. Also, I want to throw this out there. Jeff Sessions did not win a majority in his Alabama Senate primary. That was something nobody expected. So
wow.
In terms of the Trump effect this is one of the most popular senators in Alabama history. So go ahead.
Let me make a point too. Obviously, it's all just for show, but the president is also on the ballot in Republican primaries. He's got like 95% in a lot of places.
So the fact that they didn't vote for Sessions is
so he's part of one of the sort of historical things you look at for an incumbent president is, are they doing well in their own primary? Certainly Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, the three most recent reelected presidents, all did great. Trump is certainly looking more like them, a lot more like them than candidates in the past, incumbent presidents who had trouble in primaries.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, I mean, put this in context of moments for the left, I think. Where is this a trial period? Is it a period of soul searching? Is it a period of, I mean, in terms of the people you've spoken with while you were off the air, what are they feeling right now in terms of, do they think there's a plausible case to be made that Sanders can still be the Democratic nominee, or is there resignation that is beginning to happen in there?
No, there's people are certainly still committed. They still feel like this is a winnable race. They're absolutely not giving up on this. You know, one thing they have to do, I think, is to set it up not as a Sanders against the world contest, because the Democratic Party, today, the suburban voters in the Democratic Party showed if it's Sanders against the world and the world is Joe Biden and they think that he's electable, they'll go with that. So if they can set it up as an electable progressive against an unelectable Biden, then that's the frame that they could possibly win on. So Biden getting out on the campaign trail could help them with that. You know, the more gaffes he makes. Right. You know, the media stopped paying attention to the things that he was saying. Right. He said he was arrested trying to meet Nelson Mandela, and he said it over and over again. He kept saying that he was involved with the civil rights movement when he's on video saying that yes, that was a lie, I was never involved. This back in the 80s, he admitted it was a lie. Now he's saying it again. So now he's going to get the spotlight again. So when he starts telling lies like this again, at least it'll get covered. And so that's going to make people think, I'm
not sure
is this the horse we want to ride?
The way that you want, Ryan. Because I think in the beginning, there was the skepticism. There was still Buttigieg. There still was Warren. There were alternatives. Now, he's the guy. You know, that's when.
Well, but it's like, I don't think it's the media will give him a pass, but it's going to be a debate stage with Bernie versus Biden. And Bernie's team let him up off the mat. They weren't talking about that Nelson Mandela stuff. The Social Security case that they had made previous to Iowa, we weren't hearing so much about that. A lot of the focus went to Bloomberg, in some ways rightly so. That mistake is not going to be made again. So they will have the opportunity to make that case. But let's say that Biden is the nominee. Let's say he goes in the Democrat. Let's say he wins it fair and square, gets the plurality, maybe an outright majority, goes into the convention. What does that look like for the future of the Democratic Party when you have, I mean, what numbers of young voters are going for Bernie Sanders? It's like 60%. I mean, it's overwhelming voters under 30 who are energized, excited, donating, organizing, volunteer. I mean, these are like your foot soldiers if you're the Democratic Party. And you have just completely demoralized them if Joe Biden is the nominee. What does that future look like for the Democratic Party?
I mean, I think you'll have a significant number of them looking at third parties, like trying to organize a third party, trying to seek some other path that a lot of people will conclude. I think it's a fool's errand, but I can't blame them for trying. Like they'll look at this situation and say, well, this party doesn't want us.
Doesn't want us, and
has
they
the power
see the
to stop
fight
us.
within the Democratic Party as just as existential as the fight against Trump. Many of them.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You know, Kyle, one thing I wanted you to pick up on is we were talking about this last time you were here. These white working class voters, non-college educated white voters who Biden beat Sanders with in Virginia. I think I'm going to be hearing that a lot whenever it comes to Biden's case on why he's electable. Do those numbers stack up, maybe in some of the last polls that we're seeing, and across the exits that we see from Super Tuesday?
Well, just in looking at some of what you'd consider to be kind of white working class regions, you know, I think Biden did perfectly well in Western North Carolina, which is another Appalachian place. Although again, to the extent that Sanders was winning counties in North Carolina, they were more in Western North Carolina. Of course, you know, one of his vote centers was Buncombe County, which is where Asheville is. So that was a place where Sanders won. But states like Oklahoma and Arkansas voted for Biden. Although just because those voters picked him in the primary doesn't mean that they would in the general. I mean, I think that's still going to be a very strong vote if, in fact, Biden is the nominee for Trump. Now, I think what Biden could point to is that, hey, a lot of the extra turnout, like in Virginia, turnout was really high. It was higher than 2008 even. And where you saw the turnout spikes were in kind of Northern Virginia, suburbanites. And so that seems to be more of if Biden's the nominee, that's more of the path, even though Biden's reputation is, you know, hard scrabble guy from Scranton or, you know, what have you.
Voters,
but that's not what the election is going to be. I think that the Biden nomination is more of a transitioning the Democratic Party more toward trying to go after affluent, highly educated suburbanites, people who really are very animated by not liking Trump. I mean, I think one I've never seen this poll question asked, but I'd be curious to ask it. Would just be to ask Democratic voters, who do you think was the worst president, Trump or Bush?
Yeah.
I think the Sanders people would probably say Bush.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the other voters might say Trump.
Very interesting.
Excellent.
And again, because some of the new people in the Democratic Party are people who voted for Bush. Again, 16 years ago, or what have you. So again, it's a bet on this sort of new Democratic electorate. But then there's the question of how does Biden perform on the trail? Does he generate any sort of youth turnout? I think maybe he's sort of a transition figure in that he'll say, "Hey, put me in there just to get this guy out," which may be a good message, but I don't think it's certainly not an inspiring one. And I'd also say, for Democratic leaders, okay, so a lot of them think that Sanders is a bad candidate. He's too liberal. They might be right about that. But if Sanders would indeed be a bad general election nominee, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. That doesn't necessarily mean that Biden is also a great choice. I mean, I think there are problems for both of them, and either of them would have some liabilities. Now, granted, the president's got all sorts of problems too, so I think he's beatable by both of them potentially.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and then there's coronavirus, which is just the black swan event. And
which, by the way, might have changed tonight. This is something Crystal and I didn't talk about as much. But
the exit polls for voters who said coronavirus was a big factor, they went overwhelmingly for Biden. So we won the coronavirus vote. Final thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. Not only is it going to affect the ability to carry out the election, because every week that goes on, as we get deeper into the pandemic,
Washington State is next week, and that's like. They have a massive outbreak.
And they're only a couple weeks ahead of the rest of us. We're going to have what Washington has here in a couple of weeks. Right. And so everywhere that's going to still be voting is going to be doing
your segment, the grim future?
The grim future. The grim reaper.
But yeah, so I could see a lot of these Democrats thinking, oh, there's a pandemic coming. Let's get the safe guy who's going to hire normal people, who's going to solve this. It's not time for a revolution in the middle of a pandemic. I can see Democratic voters telling themselves that, and like you said, the poll numbers bore that out, and I think that has to be.
Although the Sanders team could make the case, I'm the healthcare guy.
Right.
Everyone should be covered.
That's what I thought was going to happen on coronavirus. I was like, oh God, the case for Medicare for all is going to shoot through the roof. But
nobody thinks that's going to save us next week.
That's true. You can never predict these things. All right, guys.
Gentlemen, great to have you both. Appreciate you both so much. And thank you all so much for watching. We love seeing your comments. We love seeing your tweets and your pictures and all of that. So thank you for being with us.
That's right. And we're going to be back with more expert analysis on the final results tomorrow morning on Rising. Make sure you stay tuned to Rising throughout the cycle for all your 2020 elections.
And do not forget to send us your questions for #RisingQs, our weekly social media Q&A. Ask us about things you saw tonight, the post-Super Tuesday landscape, or, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Mention me or Crystal, Twitter, post your question to Instagram. Either way, just make sure to tag it, #RisingQs, and share, subscribe to us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. You gotta share everything.
Just many
tag everything.
For you.
Thank you guys also again. We appreciate you so much. I love seeing these photos of you all together. You're with your moms, dads, families together, watch parties. For those of you who have Rising watch parties, we're especially shout out to you.
That's right. So, we love you a little extra.
Yeah, that's right. You get it a little extra. So if you coordinate them, I'll love you even more.
Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.